you spend if you bought 1.5 pounds of turkey for $6.99 a pound? In this lesson, you will learn how to multiply decimals by using the standard algorithm. Let's review. You've used an array model before to show multiplication. Imagine you're a farmer and you're planting 3 rows and 12 columns of strawberries. This can be represented by the algebraic expression 3 times 12. If you drew an array, you would see that you have 36 strawberries. Let's also review base 10 blocks. As you recall, 100 block represents 100, 3 tens blocks represents 30, and 5 ones blocks represents 5, thus making the total number 135. A common misunderstanding is that multiplying with decimals is the same as multiplying with whole numbers. Let's look at some multiplication equations containing only whole numbers. As you can see, the products are also whole numbers, just as the factors are. But multiplying with decimals is not the same as multiplying with whole numbers. Let's look at some equations containing decimals. Here you can see that when the factors are decimals, the products are also decimals. Another interesting thing to note about multiplying with decimals is that the products are actually smaller than the factors involved. Now that we've reviewed, let's learn the steps for multiplying with decimals. Here we see 2 and 4 tenths times 1 and 2 tenths. The first step of multiplying with decimals is to estimate the product. If we estimated, we would get about 2 and 5 tenths. Now that we've estimated, the second step is to stack the numbers vertically and multiply. You can forget about the decimal point for a second. You see that we would get 288. The third step is to insert the decimal point into the product. This step can be a little tricky to understand, but once you get the hang of it, it'll be easy. But you can't just put the decimal point anywhere. Here's how you figure out where to put the decimal point. Let's go back to our answer of 288 from before. In order to figure out where to put the decimal point, you have to look back at the factors. Let's start with 1 and 2 tenths. Notice that the decimal point is moved 1 to the left. That means in the product, you have to move your decimal point 1 to the left. Now let's look at our other factor, 2 and 4 tenths. Notice that the decimal point is also located 1 to the left. That means in our product, we have to move our decimal point over 1 more to the left. So you can see that our final answer would be 2 and 88 hundredths. Let's look at another example. Here we have 4 and 8 hundredths times 8 tenths. The first step is to estimate the product. The second step is to stack the numbers vertically and multiply. Again, you can forget about the decimal point for a second. And the last step is to insert the decimal point into the product. Let's look at that step one more time. In order to figure out where the decimal point goes, you have to look at each of the factors. Let's take a look at 4 and 8 hundredths first. You see that the decimal point moves over 2 to the left? That means that in your product, you have to move the decimal point 2 to the left. Now let's look at 8 tenths. Notice how the decimal point is located 1 more place to the left. That means that in your answer, you have to move the decimal point over 1 more to the left. So our final product of 4 and 8 hundredths times 8 tenths would be 3 and 264 thousandths. You might be wondering, why do we have to move the decimal point? Let's go back to the problem we were just working with. In order to make this problem a lot easier to solve, let's convert both of these decimals to whole numbers. In order to make 4 and 8 hundredths into a whole number, we have to multiply by 100. That would give us 408. And in order to make 8 tenths into a whole number, we have to multiply by 10. Now we have 400 times 8, which equals 3,264. But we're not done yet. multiplied by 100. Now we have to undo that by dividing by 100. So let's take our product of 3,264 and divide by 100. You get 32 and 64 hundredths. Remember when we multiplied by 10 to make the 8/10 a whole number? Now we have to divide by 10. So let's take our 32 and 64 hundredths and divide by 10, leaving us with 3 and 264 thousandths. So our final answer, again, would be 3 and 264 thousandths. In this lesson, you have learned how to multiply decimals by using the standard algorithm.